Well, welcome. Here we are. We are on video this time for our podcast. Now, if you're listening on just the audio version, you can search us on YouTube because we officially have a video version of the podcast. Here and there, we will have special podcasts that are going to have special guests. And today, that will be the reason. So thank you so much again for joining us for another episode. I can't believe, I think we're episode number 12 now of the Covering Your Health with Evelyn Erives podcast presented by IEHP.
Welcome to Covering Your Health, a wellness podcast dedicated to covering all areas of living a healthy and happy lifestyle. From healthy hearts to understanding health plans and everything in between, each episode will provide you with a better understanding of managing your health, preventative care, and staying on the right path for your family's wellness journey. The Covering Your Health podcast is presented by IEHP. Now, your host, Evelyn Erives.
We are so excited for today's episode. You know, men's mental health is very close to my heart. And today we have a very special episode with not just one, but two guests. And I'm really proud to welcome my special guests here. My husband, Chris.
Hey,
hi.
How are you?
Thank you for being here, babe. And Dr. Paul McMahon. Hi.
Hello there. Happy to be here.
He is an Inland Empire-based psychologist. Now, today we're going to discuss the stigmas behind men and mental health. Now, we talked a little bit about this actually in a previous episode where we were discussing mental health in general, and we realized there's so much more to talk about when it comes to men's mental health. So we're going to talk about why men are most likely not to speak up, how men's mental health touches really all of us, men and women, because we have households that have men in them. We're also going to talk a little bit about Chris's own mental health journey. We privately and openly have discussed this many, many times. We had a family podcast for a long time that we've discussed this on. So really there are no questions that are off.
No.
Right? I
Yeah,
mean, I can
nothing's off
I can
limits.
dive in, Chris.
Yeah, well, you know everything.
Okay.
Already.
I do know everything. I think. Maybe I don't. We'll find out. Dr. McMahon is going to help us with that as well. We're going to go ahead and just get started first. Dr. McMahon, thank you, first of all. I'm so happy. By the way, this is our first on-camera podcast.
All right. Happy to be your
And
guinea
look at
pig.
you wore your tie, and you look so nice. So thank you
you.
for being here. Let's talk about you for a second. Tell me how you went into this line of work.
Well, many years ago in college, I sort of eventually moved towards becoming a psychologist, got my doctoral degree. But when it was time to go practice, I found that working with high-functioning folks like you and I was okay, but I really enjoyed more challenging clients. And I slowly built a career that kind of started with the homeless, then moved over to specializing in addictions, then segued greatly to working with senior mental health and those with Alzheimer's. And my career brought me about 15 years ago to now working full-time with what we might call the criminally insane, the forensic population here in California. I've always liked getting my hands dirty, forgive the analogy,
No,
former
understood.
patients, of working with clients who, in theory, need the most help.
Right.
And I've really enjoyed that. When IEHP, who I also work for, reached out and said, can you be a part of this conversation? I said I would love to, because what you're saying about men in general, let alone homeless men or addicted men or some of the more macho men out there struggling with their mental health issues, often for reasons different than women, I was happy to come and be your guinea pig for your first video broadcast.
I'm so glad you were here. And wow, you've worked with so many types of people.
I truly have been fortunate to be able to work with interesting populations that generally I think we can all agree need some additional assistance. And if it's brought me to your show to spread the word about getting some help if you need it, then that's fortunate.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here. Let's dive right into it.
Okay.
Why do you think there is such a stigma around men's mental health?
Well, and I don't want to blame just men, because it's not as though women are running to therapy, going to their friends, I'm in therapy now.
Right, very true.
I think some of the same hesitancies reach across both genders, all ages. And we're talking about a little bit of shame or embarrassment about having an emotional issue. It's one thing to have a broken arm. We can almost brag to our friends, I broke my arm skiing. If you have something far more serious like cancer, it is still something that your family and friends can glom around and give you love.
Yeah.
We can talk about these things, but if you're dealing with the blues, if you're dealing with extreme nervousness, or some of the more profound symptoms like hearing voices, mania, addiction, those things people are a lot more private about, a lot more ashamed about. You're far more reluctant to tell your friends, your families, your coworkers, your neighbors, the members of your congregation, whoever you're spending time with about your problem.
Right.
So I think there's a shame element, is it? And when we're talking about why specifically men also might have a problem is men can often be very can-do. I've got this. Don't need any help. It's just a blemish. I'll live with it. I don't need your assistance. And I'm not saying that they minimize their issues, but men are very good at compartmentalizing what they can take care of and what they can't. And they can take care of everything.
Of course.
So I think those two issues combined, that we have a sort of natural embarrassment about mental health issues, no matter how small or how large, plus the fact that a lot of people, especially men, feel that we can fix these on our own. It's not that huge. I've got this. It's just me having the blues and crying my eyes out.
Right.
And that's something I can handle. Or it's me, oh, I'm hearing voices. I'm not going to tell anyone, and I'm going to fix this myself.
Yeah, I don't want to scare everybody,
Yeah.
so I'm just going to see what I can do.
But again, I'm not saying this is just for men. This is shared by women as well. This experience of, oh God, the minute I open my own thoughts up to this, it makes it very real.
Right.
But that's the first step in getting help and getting better and getting stronger. So to answer your question, I would say, yeah, shame and embarrassment about emotional concerns exists for all of us, but also kind of minimizing the gravity of mental health issues. Like, oh, well, let's just poo-poo it. I'm not bleeding.
Right.
And most mental health issues aren't technically deadly.
And you can't see it.
And I can't see it. So if I hide it well enough, I've got this. And I can go on YouTube and see the solution and we're fine.
We're so good at going to YouTube for everything.
YouTube University.
And there's nothing wrong with going to YouTube for some assistance. Yeah, sometimes that's all you need. But by and large, my point is reach out and get some help. This mental health issue you're addressing probably needs some professional assistance.
Can you give us some of the signs of depression and anxiety that men should be aware of?
I would, and I love that you picked those two overlapping dilemmas. I would say that for mental health professionals like myself, those are probably the two biggest overarching flavors of mental health issues. As I'd mentioned earlier, there are other problems we can talk about forever, the schizophrenias and the bipolar depressions out there. And of course, addiction. These are all big problems, but most mental health professionals would say, yes, I'm dealing with patients who are dealing with a type of anxiety disorder or a type of depressive disorder. To answer your question about symptoms, I think it is almost intuitive when we say a nervous disorder. What comes to mind is I'm feeling nervous. That might be different for people, whether you're someone who shakes a lot with palpitations, or you're someone who sweats a lot, or you're someone who gets short of breath, or you might be someone whose thoughts are racing. But when we're talking about the subject of anxiety dilemmas, they are different from depression. And depression, and I'll expand on that, but that's usually a lack of energy and sorrow and sadness. Anxiety often comes with some sorrow and sadness, but you're really talking about tension, nervousness, anxiety, stress. These are often dilemmas that Americans feel, all people on the planet can
Right.
feel. Sometimes we even brag about it. We can even say, oh my goodness, my job is so stressful and I'm a type A personality and I thrive on this.
We all know someone like that.
And there's
Or people that are trying to be like
yeah,
that.
exactly.
people that try to be like that. Again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and I wouldn't couch that in the terms of being a mental illness. When an anxiety disorder reaches the point of what we'd call a mental illness, then that's serious. And that would be nothing anyone's bragging about. And that could be as obscure as having a phobia of snakes, or something as prevalent of having social anxiety and you don't want to go to your family get-togethers. It could be panic disorder where out of the blue you feel like you're dying instantly, no matter the surroundings, and that feeling is dreadful to have. So anxiety disorder, as you might say, is an umbrella term, and it would help the clientele talk to their professionals and the people in their life, specifically, how is it impacting you? Are you someone with a phobia? Are you someone who is very disengaged with people and you would avoid people at all costs? Are you someone with panic disorder? There is a host of different nervous or anxiety disorders, but what they have in common, to get back to your question, is a feeling of nervousness, is a subjective feeling of tension.
So that actually brings to Chris,
Yeah.
I think, very well, right? If that brings you into this.
Yeah, I mean, I have anxiety like a lot worse since the episode I had a couple years back. So a couple years back, I was working in Beverly Hills. I was driving 2 hours from the Inland Empire one way to Beverly Hills and then 2 hours back. Obviously took a lot of my day away. Didn't get to see my kids in much, and it was a stressful job. I got when I started, I was at one position, and then 2 weeks later, when someone quit, I was stuck in 2 more positions, and dealing with very powerful people, not knowing necessarily that if I was doing stuff right or wrong, or anyway, really, no real leadership at the job either. So I'm going in there blind every day, trying to do my best with no feedback, and I the tension. I can feel my chest getting tight right now just thinking about it. Just overwhelming tension. And then one day I was driving to work with my sister, or I was driving to work on the phone with my sister. And I don't even know what happened. I just tensed up. My hands wouldn't move. I'm on the freeway trying to get off the freeway. Got off the freeway. My wife was called by my sister right away. She left work, came pick me up on the side of the freeway. It was scary. I didn't know what was going on. I had no clue what was going on. Now, since then, like I said, I have a lot of anxiety. There's even been points where we'll be at concerts and we'll be like just surrounded by people, and all of a sudden I'll be like,
we have to get out of here.
I have to go. I
That
can't be
recently
here.
happened,
I
and
cannot
was like,
be
what
here.
is going on? You're not this guy.
Yeah, and I'm like, we gotta go.
Okay.
And it's just when it first happened, it was very shocking.
But there were signs before that too.
Correct. I had gone to the ER a couple weeks prior to that with chest pain. And then when the doctor came and sat down and said, you're just having a panic attack.
And they almost said it like that. You're just having a panic attack. And because I was in there with
Yes.
him, and I was thinking to myself, this isn't just anything.
Right. I'm in the ER.
He thought he was dying. We thought he was just having a heart attack. So just having a panic attack feels like that.
And I've heard this story numerous times, and I'm glad you're apparently getting better,
Yes,
and that's
yes.
great. And what you described was sadly the typical progression of panic disorder, where often a heart attack type of feeling precipitates the whole thing, very often going to an emergency room, and very often being kind of poo-pooed, meaning we have customers who are bleeding, and yours is just a panic attack. It is a bit insulting. They don't know the gravity because they're not feeling it in the moment that you're feeling it. And it was perhaps kind of a dig.
Yeah.
But the blessing embedded in that is you weren't having a heart attack.
Oh, thank God.
And this is a sad wake-up call that you might have a budding nervous disorder that needs mindfulness and needs a loving person in your life who is at your side, and some hints that maybe you need to go address this. So what you described was very common. I've had many patients in my career tell me I was kind of poo-pooed at the emergency room, which was a wake-up call, however insulting, that this is a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And I thought I would sooner have owned a cardiac condition than a mental health condition.
Yeah, right.
They can treat that a little easier.
Yeah, exactly, and it's got some evidence to
you can
it.
see it.
You can see it. You can do EKGs. You can do all this stuff to sense that. Whereas a man or a woman describing a panic attack sounds just like a heart attack.
Feels like
tingling, you had said tightness everywhere. And the first place we go to when we're in these thoughts is, I need medical emergency services right now. It's fortunate you were able to pull over to the side of the freeway and didn't get in an automobile accident.
Yeah, it was close.
And also fortunate that you have someone to come and assist in these times. You've also described a rather common trajectory, is that once an individual has one panic attack, sometimes it kind of sets the thinking of, well, okay, let's go to this concert, but gosh, I hope I don't have one of those attacks during the concert, but I'm going to muscle down and go with it. And you may or may not have a good time, but you might always be on edge, waiting for a clue of, oh, I'm having the palpitations. Let's jam. Let's get out of here. And then the treatment might involve, all right, you have to recognize the clues ahead of time, and when is it in a medical emergency. And if it's not even that important of a concert, just for your own comfort, go ahead and leave.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can't leave things.
Very back, close to the exit. That's what we did.
We did, but there were 9,000 people in front of us.
We were at a very big concert.
Exactly. And what sets us off, for instance, had you had your first panic attack, say, at a grocery store, your circumstances might be different, and it might be, I don't want to get in the car, or grocery shopping sets me off. I can no longer be in this situation. So having panic disorder does kind of set the people off who have it for future worries about your next panic attack, which can kind of prompt your next panic attack. So the interventions psychologically or even psychiatrically with medications are geared to help lower your overall level of anxiety and help you go to events in your life that are naturally panic-inducing. Even without a nervous disorder, concerts can be a bit overwhelming, and crowds stink no matter what.
Figuratively and.
Exactly. So you want to be able to enjoy the good things in life and not be as afraid of having another panic attack or any nervous reaction going forward.
I know that Evelyn could probably speak on this. I'm very cautious at where I go now. I'm not usually going out a lot or doing a lot of things like we used to do. We're always busy. We're kids and everything. I'm very like, nah, I don't really want to do that. I think I'll just.
I have to get him now out of his box. We're very social people, but since this happened, and this was a few years ago. I mean, he's a lot better now, so I will say that. But we do now. I'm like, hey, we are going to this family function. Like, you can't say no.
I'll be like, tell me the day before, so I don't have to think about
so
it.
I can prepare for it.
Amen. And that's a wonderful coping mechanism, is to forewarn someone. Here's what to expect. You know the aunts and uncles, they'll all be there, and I also expect you to, shower and shave and show up.
Yeah, you're gonna have
and
to be ready, okay?
you're gonna be fine. With panic disorder comes some extra cautions you need to be aware of, that very often the people with panic disorder, in order to lower the chances of another one, will imbibe in too much drinking or other substances. And while that devil sort of works temporarily, if you begin saying, oh, I might be nervous going to the grocery store, I better have a couple of beers, or I might be nervous getting behind the wheel of a car, so I better take a Xanax, or going to a family get-together, that drives me kooky, so I'd better have some substances. Right. And before you know it, the substances can become a larger problem than the initial panic disorder. Course. So just to be alerted to these things too, and if you're seeking therapy for these types of things, to talk to your therapist about your coping strategies. I think a coping strategy of sharing with your wife your nervousness in an open fashion is perfect. Yeah.
Our podcast did a lot of help by speaking about it on the podcast, and people commenting online, or somebody texting me saying, I heard your podcast, you're doing great, kind of thing. So speaking about it has helped me a lot, and that's pretty much my job now anyway, is speaking, production, promotion, everything. So I feel like that was the best way for me to address it. And speaking with my wife about it, talking to friends about it. I had another podcast where we talked about breast cancer. I would talk about it on there. So I felt like the more I spoke about it, even right now, I feel like I'm feeling better already be speaking about it. The more I speak about it, the better I feel. The less I feel like I'm more in charge.
Right, that the panic's not controlling you, or the potential future panic attack is no longer on the menu. You are. You're in charge of where this is going. And I think that speaks to the beauty of psychotherapy, whether you're talking to a psychologist or LCSW or some type of therapist, getting it off your chest and thinking about it more openly is curative. So that is a good thing. I also like the fact that, getting back to Evelyn's question about 10 minutes ago of symptoms of depression, is I think you can hear in our conversation this cluster of symptoms related to a nervous disorder, namely panic disorder, but it's very similar to social anxiety, phobias, and things like this.
To each other.
And you would hear a lot of the same symptomology of I'm afraid of what I don't even know is going to happen in the future. And you're not hearing in our conversation the symptoms, to answer your earlier question about depression. At no point are we talking here about the specter of suicide or of crying my eyes out because I just have no more energy. That cluster of symptomology, which we can get to in a minute, is radically different from anxiety disorders. So if you're seeking therapy, your dialogue with your psychiatrist, your psychologist, your counselor should be very honest about these symptoms, about anxiety symptoms. But unfortunately, I think here in America, some of us brag about stress. Some of us will talk about, I'm so depressed, I'm having panic attacks, and I'm nervous, and I'm having palpitations. And I'm thinking, you just said you have depression, but you just described anxiety.
Yeah, I think we're all confused on those kinds of feelings, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the way to get the best help is to use your language very good when describing your symptoms. You mentioned very clearly clenched fists, tingling, panic. Your verbiage was terrific. So any mental health counselor would see you and go, all right, we're talking about anxiety disorders. If we're talking about medicines, it might be a benzodiazepine, or it might be just a Benadryl. If we're talking about therapy, it would be for relaxation techniques. You picked your language perfectly, where, again, other people just in a rush to talk to a therapist might have accidentally peppered it with, and that's why I'm depressed, and that's why I'm so blue. And there is a crossover of anxiety and depression. But I would hate for you to have picked the wrong words, be placed on the wrong medicine, and then side effects don't help, and the medicine doesn't help. So the language is very good. Of being able to talk about this.
I think when I first started talking about it, I wasn't good at that because we did have an issue with some medicine and some stuff that the doctors gave me. It was making me more anxious. And so we had switched it up the first couple of weeks, and I even stayed on disability for a little bit longer because it wasn't working out. So that's good to know. It's not just me.
No, it's a common path, because it is a nerve-wracking thing. To use my earlier metaphor of a broken arm or a gaping cut, the doctor or the nurse can look directly at it and know what the symptom is. But when it comes to virtually all mental health issues, from addiction to schizophrenia, we're relying on the patient to relay the symptoms accurately so that our talk therapy can be helpful. And if you go down the medicinal route of taking medications, you want them to be ideal. So it is sometimes language barriers. We're here in Southern California. Not every provider is native English speaker. Not every patient is English. So there are some language dilemmas. And I think the beauty of this podcast is so we can talk about these languages. And it's such a blessing you're so frank about what you've been going through. People can hear this and go, oh, if I go see a mental health professional and I've got what Craig's got, I don't want to use the wrong language. I don't want to go in and just say, I'm depressed. Or you're going to have the experience of being put on the wrong medications. If you are, however, depressed, own it and don't say, I am so stressed out and I'm so nervous. I'm thinking of killing myself. I have no energy to get out of my bed. I'm like, wait a minute. You said you're stressed, but you just described
depression.
Depression. So we have to pick our language carefully.
And I think as a human, that's hard to do when it's about yourself.
Plus,
trying not to scare everyone.
Plus, it is mental. You don't know what necessarily is going on, so you're trying to explain exactly what's going on in your body, and your mind is going 1,000 miles a minute. So you got to catch up to it. It's just there's a lot of deciphering internally that the person has to do before they can even tell the doctor what it is.
Exactly. And meanwhile, you're struggling with that internal shame at the very same time you're trying to deal with private matters that, again, the person with the broken arm doesn't have to worry about what will my boss think of me with a broken arm or what will my family think of me with a broken arm.
Yeah.
But if I tell my boss I have panic disorder, if I tell my family that, I'm suicidal, I can't trust anyone's reaction.
Right. What are they going to think?
Maybe I'll keep it to myself and pull myself up by my bootstraps, and that just doesn't work for profound mental concerns. Again, if you got a case of the blues because you failed a test or you're having relationship difficulties, it might not rise to the level of a mental illness. But if your issues are impacting your work, like driving to work, then you need the intervention of a professional, and it's probably going to be difficult to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Are there strategies that can help men open up about their feelings?
I think you're a perfect example. You've let me know in just the last few minutes that you were open to dialoguing with the man in your life. And not every man has someone in their life, a family member, a loved one, that they can speak to. But you were clearly key in this situation, that you listened. You were physically present, too. You were there to help. You might not always have had the answers. You might not even have...
Sure did not.
Right. And
Not at the beginning.
You yourself might have been frustrated and scared. But your very presence as an ear to listen to was wonderful. How to help men overcome this reluctance is not an easy task. These men who have these problems have to learn that these are surmountable. We can help with just about any mental health issue out there, provided you're willing to come to the table and be honest about it. Ironically, you're looking at sort of masculinity issue versus masculinity issue. I'm ashamed. I'm not manly enough because I have a mental problem. But I'm not manly enough to actually talk about it and address it. We do have this kind of conflict going on. Men can do this. They don't have to have a loved one. Even if they want to address their issues privately, no one's saying that your therapist is going to say your problems to anyone. It can be a private endeavor. Sometimes a man might want to talk to their general practitioner, their family doctor first, and that's fine.
That's what we did, actually.
Yes,
That's
I
how we
did.
started.
Nothing wrong with that. The problem with men talking about their problems, not to be sexist, but you ladies have a cavalcade of other women to talk to your problems about.
Usually.
and you'll talk about intimate issues with your girlfriends, and you grow up that way. And you also see a host of additional doctors growing up to deal with private issues. Men generally don't. And when men, we've got solid friends that we care about greatly, but when we have a problem, instead of talking to them, we go golfing with them. And
we joke about it.
And we joke about it.
Yeah.
And that's not the worst thing in the world, but I just think women are raised to be a bit more open and candid about some of their health, both physical and mental health issues, with their loved ones and with professionals, whereas men are also raised to kind of tough it out. You'll see a doctor every 5 years, so there are societal things that make it a little bit of a struggle for men compared to women, but the resources are out there.
I was one of those guys. I was very prideful. I lived in Washington State for a long time. I graduated high school. My parents gave me a suitcase and said, "Get out, we're moving." So I've been on my own since I was 18, and I moved all the way from Washington to California, and I brought people with me, and they did things, and I've done things, and I have a successful career, and this can't affect me.
Right.
No, I'm the backbone of this family. And then instantly I'm not. I'm the broken toe of the family for a moment. And it was just, the one thing I can say.
It wasn't a broken toe. It was a lot. It was a bigger issue than a broken toe.
I could say it's helped me with my relationship with my kids a lot, actually,
Right.
talking about this, because they saw me go through it. And they're like, well, that's our dad. Like, if that can happen to him, it can happen to anybody.
Seeing your dad break down and cry
Is scary.
is scary.
Yes.
And also shocking.
Shocking, but in the long run adds to the image of what a strong man.
Yes.
Instead of denying this issue was going on, instead of being too afraid to address this issue, he's also serving as a wonderful role model of, oh, wow, when I have a dilemma that really needs the help of others, I know I should reach out.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're talking about it, and we do have a voice for this. It's not easy. And and men suffer from some of the same issues that women suffer from that are very personal, and you could lose your job.
Yeah.
For instance, the mental health issue of addiction. Men are heavily bothered by this problem, as are women, and that is something that is also for some very shameful. And how do we deal with it? We can't necessarily call our wife and say, well, I'm drunk or high right now. Can you come rescue me? That's a different dynamic entirely than I'm having a current mental health crisis at this moment. Yet, in a sense, it does have to be honestly addressed and dealt with. If I could digress just back, because I don't want to leave the umbrella term of depression alone before before we finish or wherever we're headed. But as much as anxiety is crucial, and I love talking about it, and this is wonderful, I briefly wanted to say that depression impacts men too. Interestingly, both anxiety disorders and depressive disorders impact women far more than men. But it doesn't make the hurt and the life struggles any less difficult because men get it less than women do.
Right.
Because the sad part is about men with depression is that men are about 3 or 4 times more likely to kill themselves.
That's a higher rate.
That's pretty amazing to think that women, by and large, suffer from more cases of major depression or clinical depression. By the numbers, women have this far more often, but men far more often will commit suicide than women will.
Is that because women have been conditioned to figure out coping mechanisms through their lives, and men maybe haven't had that experience?
I think that's certainly part of it. Like what we were talking about earlier, women can reach out better. Women can address their issues. Women own their issues and talk about a gaggle of friends or caregivers. And men, as I joked, will go golfing and will do anything not to talk about it other than joke about it. Also, men, frankly, are hanging out with far more lethal means of suicide than women are. Okay. You know, some women have guns, are gun owners, and some women, will have the tools with which to do it. But by and large, gun ownership is a man thing. And men try far more lethal means of killing themselves than women do overall. So it is both because women are frankly better at addressing their depression, and men have more lethal means of killing themselves. We see this great disparity.
I didn't even think about that. That wasn't
either.
even like something I would have thought of, but you're right.
Women try very often to overdose.
That was exactly what I was going to say. That would be the way.
The pills.
So for a couple of these reasons, that's why we in the therapy field, we'll take suicidal comments very seriously. When a woman says it, we're on it. But when a man says it, particularly, statistically speaking, a Caucasian middle-aged man, we have by far the highest suicide rate out there. Caucasian middle-aged men don't have the coping resources that just about any other race and our opposite gender seems to have. So that's why I wanted to touch briefly today also on depression and to not ignore it. Again, we all get the blues. We've all had relational spats. We've all gotten a ticket on the freeway. We've all been fired. We've all had realistic reasons to be briefly blue. That is a sea change from clinical depression. And being depressed means having for a month or two thoughts of no energy, can't get out of bed, I'm down, I'm out. Whereas the examples I gave a minute ago, we usually bounce out of those within a day or a week. If you find yourself not being able to bounce out of this isolative unhappiness, this tearfulness, and potential thoughts of suicide, you need intervention rapidly. These symptoms aren't going to get better on their own. And to please reach out, to understand that you're not dealing with anxiety in that case, which, stinks. No one likes being anxious, but depression's a completely different monster. And again, while the two often overlap, depression is what can lead us to thoughts of ending our life and need intervention from a loved one, our preacher, our coworkers, or a private therapist to address depression. So I just wanted to make sure we were covering those two bases.
I'm so glad you did. I'm really glad you did. Oh, gosh, I feel like there's so much more to talk about, and I know we can't go on forever and ever and ever. Do you have resources that you can share with our audience right now?
Yes, I do. Now, no matter what county you're listening to this show in, virtually every county, certainly in California, probably most counties in the United States, have what's known as county mental health. Like, for instance, we're right now in Riverside County, and so it would be called Riverside County Mental Health. And I don't have the phone numbers for these agencies.
I'll put them in our description on the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And there'd be a San Bernardino County Mental Health. And while they might not be the providers of your mental health services, they most certainly would be able to guide you in the right direction. However, I would also suggest to anyone listening who feels they need some intervention is to go to your insurance company. For instance, I'm here also representing the Inland Empire Health Plan. IEHP is the counties of Riverside and County of San Bernardino's main provider for Medi-Cal and Medicare recipients. And so we have about 1/3 of the counties are on our rolls here.
Yeah.
So you could look at IEHP as an insurance company and give them a call. This is one phone number I'm probably fairly certain of, 1-800-440-IEHP. And that's our main line, and that's for both providers and patients and loved ones to call, and with just about any question whatsoever. And after answering a couple of questions, you'll eventually get to a service provider who will be able to help you. Again, won't be the intervention, it won't be the counselor, but it would be the insurance phone answerer who can link you to the right resources, whether that's psychotherapy, group therapy, addiction counseling, rehabilitation, psychiatry for medications. And that is just the one insurance example I'm talking about. If you didn't have IEHP and you're in this county or any county and you have Aetna or Magellan or Blue Cross, reach out to your insurance main line and be patient and talk to whoever answers the phone about, I need behavioral health services. You could probably use the terms, I need mental health services, I need a psychologist, I need a psychiatrist for medicine. But I probably, to answer your question, would start with calling my insurance company if I had that phone number. Or you could also call County Mental Health to see if they have resources for you. So those would probably be the first two avenues I would go down. While we're talking about things that get in the way of us reaching out for help, there's also peculiarities like, I'm not embarrassed about it, and I know I can't deal with this alone, but do I have insurance that pays for it?
Oh my gosh, right.
Is this very costly? Is the office I would go to 20 miles away? Is it private? Will my bosses find out? So people have other reasons for not jumping to therapy.
And I feel like that's also for all health-related issues, right? Like why I'm not getting my colonoscopy or like why I'm not getting my mammogram.
Yeah. Is it covered?
Yeah, is it covered?
And do they have parking? You know,
how far away it is, like seriously.
We do. We think of these realistic things, but the first step would probably be, is there even access for me? Do I have something available through my insurance or through the county mental health? So those would probably be the first steps.
Well, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing so much. Okay, so we do have to kind of wrap this up now. You've been so informative. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And again, I also don't want to minimize the fact that today we haven't even talked about some of the more profound mental illnesses.
That's why we have to do another episode.
Yeah, so this was
think we need to.
No disservice to your listeners who themselves or loved ones are struggling with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, some of the more profound ones. My advice remains the same, and that's to seek the help. It's out there for you.
Wonderful. Yeah. Before we close, 3 key takeaways from today. I feel like there's so many takeaways, but do you have 3 of the most important in your mind?
Well, for starters, deal with it. Nothing happens if nothing happens. And, I mean, nothing changes if you don't change. So don't ignore it. If it's a very minor thing and you can, as we facetiously say, YouTube it, knock yourself out. But today we're talking about true mental problems. And panic disorder is something that can get in the way of your life going forward. That's profound. And you're a wonderful example of someone who dealt with that as with a spouse who was able to help deal with it. So the first takeaway is deal with your problem. Don't ignore it. Addictions don't go away magically, and suicidal depression you don't wake up out of it. Right. Deal with it. My next takeaway would probably be like what you clearly did. You first went to emergency room and you dealt with it honestly. Here, doctor, are my symptoms. The reaction you got was a little bit of a poo-poo, but at least you were honest with your symptoms. So when you finally get on the phone, or more importantly, get in that office with your counselor, your psychologist, your psychiatrist, please be very, very honest about your symptoms. It's very private. They're not going to call your loved ones and tattle on you, but they're not going to be able to help you unless you're being extremely honest with your current symptoms. Don't dance around whatever mentally is going on, no matter how embarrassing it might feel. So that would be my second one, is please be painfully honest. It might take a session or two to get there. A lot of us struggle with opening up about past abuses and very personal stuff, but do your best to be honest about your current symptoms. My third takeaway would be this. Psychotropic medication, whether it's anti-anxiety medications or antidepressants, antipsychotics, stuff like this, they're incredibly helpful for the right people. If your dilemma can be dealt with through talk therapy, I would initially start there. I would not necessarily make my first step to get on potent pills. If you can start by learning coping mechanisms, relaxation techniques in your potential case, what's making someone blue or depressed, and to talk about these things, but have in the back of your mind that I might need the supplement of medications. But I think our mindset in America is, I have a headache, give me an aspirin yesterday. I don't want to talk about my tension that's giving me the headache. Give me a pill. So I would kind of say, well, maybe you could think of talking through your problems a bit first, and then bring in medications if that additional assist is necessary. So those would probably be my three takeaways, is deal with it. It's not going to go away on its own. Be very honest with your professionals who you're dealing with, and reach for the medications and the psychiatry, but perhaps after first owning and talking about your dilemmas.
Perfect. That's cool. Those are wonderful takeaways. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. McMahon. Very wonderful to have you here yet again. Chris, thank you for being so honest.
Thank you.
Again.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, too, for having me.
It's a topic that needs to, the more we talk about it, the more people are going to feel okay to talk about it.
Right.
So the more we do maybe focus a little spotlight on this issue, the more someone out there will feel like they're not in a shadow. So I appreciate that so very much. And I know IEHP does and loves having you. So thank you so much
my
again.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for joining us for another Covering Your Health with Evelyn Erives. I feel like we had a really enlightening conversation with Dr. Paul McMahon, really diving into men's mental health. I know there's so many more topics surrounding and inside of this topic itself. And hopefully in future podcasts, we can get to all of that. The often overlooked angles of men's mental health is something that all of us need to have in our mind, top of mind, regularly. Whether we are a woman or a man, it all affects us. We have families. We have different dynamics within that family. So keep an eye on the men in your life. They're so important and they're so vulnerable. They really, really are. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. You matter. Your mental health matters. And together, we can create a world where every man feels seen, heard, and supported. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.